August 1945. Across hundreds of airfields in England, France, Italy and the United States, thousands of B-17 Flying Fortress bombers sit in silence. Their engines, which once roared across Europe in massive formations that could darken the sky, are now cold. The men who flew them, heroes who risked everything over enemy territory, are packing their bags. They are going home. But while peace has arrived, the story of these machines is far from over. Victory in Europe had come in May. Japan had surrendered. The greatest air war in history had ended. And yet, on airfields stretching as far as the eye can see, row upon row of flying fortresses waited, abandoned, almost ghostly. The calm was deceptive, for soon these legends of the sky would face a fate no one expected. These planes were not just machines, they were legends. They carried thousands of tons of bombs into the heart of Nazi Germany. They shaped the course of the war. They became symbols of American air power, and yet, within a few short years, almost all of them would vanish. How could such a mighty fleet disappear so completely? The answer is shocking. Why did America's most famous bombers disappear so completely after the war? The answer would shock those who believed such machines were immortal. What came next was an era of ruthless decisions that would change aviation history forever. The B-17 Flying Fortress was born of necessity. In the 1930s, the United States military wanted a heavy bomber capable of carrying the fight across oceans. Boeing answered the call. It was a design destined to become legendary, but even legends have a beginning. By the time the United States entered World War II, the Flying Fortress was ready, strong, fast, and heavily armed. It could survive flak and enemy fighters that would have downed other aircraft. It was a symbol of American ingenuity and industrial might. It was feared, respected, and unstoppable in the skies, but the peace would soon test it in a way no battle ever could. Between 1936 and 1945, 12,131 B-17s Dasmais were built. At the peak of production in 1944, factories were producing now 16 aircraft per day. The B-17G, the final variant, was the most advanced, heavily armed, and iconic version of the fleet. Millions watched these machines dominate the skies, yet few imagined how quickly they would become obsolete. Every plane carried a story. Every crew who climbed aboard risked their lives in missions that often seemed impossible. Many would never return, and yet these machines became the backbone of the strategic bombing campaign that helped turn the tide of the war. And after the war, those same planes would face an enemy they could not fight. Time and peace. The problem of peace. Then came the sudden and unexpected enemy. Peace. The war was over, the guns were silent, and the United States suddenly found itself with more bombers than it could ever use. For a machine designed to dominate, this was a battlefield it could not survive. Turned to the B-29 Superfortress, with pressurized cabins, longer range, and heavier bomb loads, had already taken the spotlight. Compared to it, the B-17 was obsolete. And so the U.S. Army Air Forces faced an unprecedented challenge. What do you do with thousands of war-winning aircraft that cost $24,000 each to build, planes that were once symbols of power but were now practically worthless in a world at peace? The solution would be ruthless and irreversible. The answer would be ruthless, practical, and devastating. Soon the skies of Europe and the deserts of America would witness one of the most systematic destructions of history. The Great Scrapping begins. By September 1945, the War Assets Administration was established to oversee disposal. Its mission, salvage what was useful and destroy what was not. The stage was set for an operation that would erase almost an entire generation of bombers. The B-17 fleet became the subject of one of the largest industrial eliminations of military hardware in history. Aircraft were categorized. Those too worn, too damaged, or unnecessary were destined for scrapping. Even the mightiest of machines were about to face extinction. In Britain, The 8th Air Force launched Operation Rethink, flying B-17s to centralized depots like Burtonwood. Engines were removed first, then instruments, radios and guns. What remained was cut into sections for aluminium scrap, material desperately needed for post-war reconstruction. What was once feared by enemies would now be reduced to mere metal. In the United States, at Kingman Army Airfield, Arizona, over 5,400 aircraft arrived for destruction between 1945 and 1946. A workforce of 2,400 men dismantled these machines with industrial precision. Engines were catalogued, airframes were cut into pieces, sections were stacked like giant Lego blocks, ready to be smelted. The scale of destruction was almost unimaginable. By mid-1946, Kingman was processing 50 aircraft per week. Similar operations ran in Arkansas and California. The scale was staggering. Visitors described the sight of row after row of flying fortresses being destroyed as haunting and unbelievable. It was the end of an era, a scene few could have imagined during the war. The economics were harsh. Aluminium prices had collapsed. Entire aircraft were worth less intact than the materials they contained. Sentimentality could not compete with practicality. For these flying fortresses, glory on the battlefield meant nothing in the world of peace. The few that survived, but not all B-17s met the scrapyard. Some were retained for post-war duties. Approximately 2,000 aircraft remained in service, though this number dwindled quickly. These survivors would take on roles that few could have predicted. The CB-17 became a cargo transport. The SB-17 was fitted with lifeboats for air-sea rescue missions, saving countless lives in Alaska and the Pacific. Roughly 130 aircraft served in this crucial life-saving role. Even here, their story was one of adaptation and survival. The TB-17 trained crews for the new B-29 Superfortress. The DB-17 directed drones and participated in atomic bomb tests at Bikini Atoll, controlling target drones and guiding experimental weapons. From war machines to test subjects, the Flying Fortress found new, unexpected life. The Navy converted 31 B-17s into PB-1W early warning aircraft with radar domes. The Coast Guard operated 18 B-17s as PB-1G search and rescue planes. Even so, these were exceptions. The vast majority continued to disappear. What remained was disappearing fast, almost overnight. Civilian conversions and forgotten potential. Civilians saw opportunity. Surplus B-17s sold for as little as $13,750. Some were converted into cargo or passenger planes. Survey companies flew them for aerial mapping across North and South America. Firefighting companies adapted them to drop retardant, fighting forest fires across the American West. Even in civilian hands, the Flying Fortress was facing a slow disappearance. Yet the numbers continued to dwindle. By 1950, fewer than 500 aircraft remained. Most were reduced to metal ingots, recycled, melted, and forgotten. The mightiest fleet of the skies was fading into oblivion. Near oblivion. Museums lacked foresight. Early donations were often scrapped when space or funds ran out. Throughout the 1950s and 1960s, more B-17s disappeared through accidents, retirements, and neglect. The world was losing a living symbol of history. By 1970, fewer than 100 aircraft were thought to exist worldwide. From a fleet of over 12,700, more than 99% had vanished. The disappearance of the B-17 is one of the most astonishing losses of a modern military fleet in history. Restoration and resurrection. In the 1970s, attitudes began to change. Collectors, warbird enthusiasts, and museums began to recognize the historical significance of the Flying Fortress. Derelict aircraft were recovered from scrapyards, farms, and even remote crash sites. Restoration often took decades and millions of dollars. Hope was returning slowly for these machines of legend. Sentimental Journey, recovered from a Mexican scrapyard in 1978, was meticulously restored to flying condition. Today, about 45 B-17 survive and roughly a dozen remain airworthy. Each flying B-17 represents enormous dedication, investment, and painstaking work to preserve history. Their survival is almost miraculous, a testament to human dedication. Session 28, Legacy. From 12,731 built to fewer than 50 survivors, the B-17's near disappearance is a story of triumph, obsolescence, and resurrection. These aircraft shaped the outcome of World War II, became icons of American air power, and yet almost vanished within a generation of peace. Their survival owes everything to the foresight of collectors, historians, and enthusiasts who refused to let history disappear. The story of the Flying Fortress reminds us that even the mightiest symbols of war can vanish almost overnight, leaving only fragments, memories, and stories to preserve their legend. And it leaves us with a haunting thought. How many of today's icons, machines, monuments, and moments of history might vanish if we fail to act before it's too late? The B-17 is a lesson for history and for all of us.